So after Armored Core 3, FromSoftware found themselves in a spot they've been in with a handful of these games so far. They just made their new best entry in the franchise, and now they need to follow it up. The real question is, how do you do it? With Generation 1, they added an entirely new mode to the expansions in the form of the arena, and in Generation 2, they cut the arena entirely and instead made a 100 mission long campaign. So what did they decide to do for an expansion for Generation 3, and how did it work out? Well, let's talk about it. And before getting too far into the video, I should mention that this is the 7th in a series of videos where I'm playing every single Armored Core game for the first time and reviewing them as I go along in preparation for Armored Core 6, which came out a few days ago. Oh well. While you don't have to have seen the rest of the videos to watch this one, you'll be missing a lot of context about my personal journey with these games if you haven't seen them, so I'll have the playlist linked in the description below if you want to go and check those out first. And something small to note at the beginning is that this is the first game in the franchise to go by multiple different names depending on what region you're from. In Japan, the game is called Armored Core 3 Silent Line, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the official title of the game, as that's what the actual development team named it. But if you're from the West like me, then your copy is probably called Silent Line Armored Core, which is such a bizarre name change because it almost sounds like they're trying to reboot the series and call it Silent Line going forward, and they're just using Armored Core as a subtitle to identify the brand. Which, spoiler alert, is not at all what they were trying to do, so I really don't understand why the Western publisher Agetec decided to make this change. But regardless, Armored Core 3 Silent Line is a standalone expansion for Armored Core 3, developed by FromSoftware and released only 8 months after the base game. And I had a ton of people in my comments and in my livestream chat telling me that when I got to Silent Line, I should carry over my Armored Core 3 save file, because if I didn't, I probably wouldn't enjoy the game very much. And I was planning on doing this only because so many different people had told me this independent of one another, so I trusted it. But here's the thing. While I was making the Armored Core 3 video, I was also building a new PC that I desperately needed for work. So when I sat down at the beginning of the week to start Silent Line, I was on the new PC, meaning I didn't have my Armored Core 3 saves, because those were on my other PC's hard drives, the PC that I had literally just brought to the storage unit earlier that day. So I started a new save for this game, which honestly I wasn't all that upset about because it at least keeps things consistent with the rest of the videos so far. This also means that I didn't get to use OP Intensify because I didn't have it, which is great. One thing I did to make sure I mitigated any downsides of this was I immediately started out by working through the low ranks of the arena to make some credits and start pulling an AC together. And speaking of, the early game economy actually felt really good to me personally. Aside from one thing. While the pace of credits being earned is dialed in just about perfectly, much like it was in Armored Core 3, there were almost no parts in the shop. And I mean, seriously, just look at this. I was trying to figure out what I could even do with this few parts, and really, the answer was just to make a super basic biped or quad leg build, because nothing else would really be all that useful with this limited of a selection. I'm assuming that this alone is the reason that people recommended pulling an AC3 save over to Silent Line, because holy shit, there's just nothing there. But back to the arena, there are a handful of new maps made for the arena in this game. But this isn't like the difference between Project Phantasma's maps and Master of Arenas, because between those two games, there were a couple of reused arena maps, but the rest of them were completely original. But here, most of Silent Line's arena maps are just the ones from Armored Core 3. In fact, every arena map from AC3 is in Silent Line, and there are only 3 new maps on top of that. And while it isn't much of an addition, and it is kind of lame to play through mostly the same maps all again, all 3 of the new maps are really enjoyable, so I'm not overly upset over it. In fact, one of the new maps, Military District, has a unique feature that I really enjoyed. This map is covered in buildings, and all of them are fully destructible. Destructible pieces of the environment aren't necessarily new for the franchise, but having an entire arena map be destructible like this, especially with full animation as the buildings crumble, is taking things to that next level and something that made me really enjoy this map over others in the game. And it is worth noting that one of these new maps is just a city map that was used for missions back in AC3, ported over to the arena. And this isn't the only reused mission map from Armored Core 3 either, as during the campaign, there are a small handful of missions where you'll revisit locations from the base game. It's something small, but I felt that it was worth noting only because with that being considered, there are really only 2 new arena maps in Silent Line. Overall, while I enjoyed Silent Line's arena quite a bit, I didn't feel that it hit the highs of Armored Core 3's arena. I did feel it was generally a more difficult climb than in AC3, but I just didn't feel that the opponents in this arena were quite as interesting, along with the fact that I was mostly just playing on the same maps that I had the week before. But of course, the highlight of the arena is always the number 1 pilot, the Ninebreaker, even though it technically isn't called that anymore. And this game's Ninebreaker is Mobius, a deadly pilot equipped with an extremely lethal middleweight biped build. Mobius is tough and definitely lives up to his title and rank. He boosts around the arena like crazy, although opting for more horizontal movement and overboosts compared to just flying through the air like Ace did. And also comparing him to Ace, he's definitely not as tough, but damn, he still gave me trouble for a solid 30 minutes. Between his laser rifle, his laser blade, his missiles, and his shoulder-mounted grenade launcher, he could melt my AC incredibly quickly. But after enough dedication and a bit of luck, I was finally able to defeat him. And honestly, even though he isn't as difficult as Ace, I think I enjoyed fighting him more. Ace would constantly fly over my head and try to get behind me, meaning that for 90% of my fights against him, he wasn't even on my screen. That, on top of the fact that Mobius was only 30 minutes of frustration for me, whereas Ace was a whole 2 hours, and once you get past that 1 hour point, you're kinda just ready to be done. So Mobius may not have been as challenging, but he was certainly more enjoyable for me personally. But with all the arena talk out of the way, let's talk about the story. And in my opinion, this is Silent Line's biggest strength. The story of Silent Line is a direct continuation of Armored Core 3, centering around humanity's development and exploration of the surface after the destruction of the controller. Early on in the game, the missions are your standard Armored Core fare, with you just going around doing random jobs for corporations. And in these early stages of the game, I was really skeptical about Silent Line. I was playing on the same arena maps as in 3, doing missions that felt just like 3, and I had an incredibly limited selection of available parts. It ended up being really hard for me to shake the feeling that I was genuinely just playing Armored Core 3 for a second time. But after like 6 or 7 missions, I got an email telling me that the part restrictions had been lifted, and it was like the entire game opened back up immediately. It wasn't a small amount of parts either, it was like 80% of the shop had opened up all at once with this email. Around this point, company representatives start to explain to you that they're all warring over a territory known as the Silent Line. Every attempt by the corporations to explore the Silent Line is met with resistance from unmanned units, the origin of which are completely unknown. With this, a new organization comes into the story known as the Artificial Intelligence Office. The AIO, as it is abbreviated to, aims to assist the corporations with exploring the Silent Line by helping them develop their own unmanned units to mitigate the loss. And at this point in the campaign, things start to pick up gameplay-wise by quite a bit. Even the mid-game missions here in Silent Line have scenarios such as fighting an AC in an elevator, followed by fighting an AC in a large open room, but then another AC comes crashing through the ceiling halfway through. So the mid-game challenge level in Silent Line is roughly equivalent to fighting 3 ACs in a row without resupplying ammo or repairing your own AC. So yeah, things are quite a bit harder than Armored Core 3 here. And the campaign missions in this game are easily the most difficult in the franchise so far, which I enjoyed, for the most part. See, near the end of the game, some missions become these long-running gauntlets where each individual encounter is still fairly easy, but getting through the entire mission without your AC getting destroyed is a painfully difficult task. That's not to say that every mission is like this, but there were 3 or 4 in the latter half of the game that were rage-inducing for me personally. An additional downside of Silent Line's longer missions is that the FCS lock system starts to become the hardest boss fight in this game. Some of these missions have dozens on dozens of enemies all packed into large-scale complexes, and as has always been the case, your FCS lock-on will target enemies through walls. That alone isn't a problem, but when there are this many enemies packed in so tightly, you'll be fighting an enemy that's in the room with you, but your lock-on will be targeting another dozen or so enemies that are behind all the walls and in the next room, and it becomes really difficult to tell whether or not you're locked onto your immediate enemy or not, just because of the amount of target changes that happen while you're trying to aim at them. Silent Line, more than any game in the franchise up to this point, definitely could have benefited from some sort of hard lock-on system, where if you hit some button or combination of buttons on the controller, you would be able to stick your lock-on onto that one enemy and disable it from targeting any others for the time being. But even with those negatives, the mission quality in Silent Line is just fantastic. One mission that's a great example of this is one that's at about the midway point of the game, where you have to sneak around these patrolling helicopters in these canyons without being detected to get to another corporation's base and surprise attack them. Once you arrive at the base, you're tasked with just wreaking as much havoc as possible while the recon team steals some information from inside. While the team is inside, they radio to let you know that they detected an AC, and once they're out, your handler gives you the option to either leave and call it a job well done, or go inside the base to challenge the AC. I, of course, chose to challenge them, and a friendly AC got airdropped in with me to help me out. So we go inside, and it turns out there were 2 ACs inside rather than just the one that the recon team picked up on. So now it's a 2v2. And on top of that, there are these tanks scattered all around the arena that, if ruptured, will drastically raise the ambient temperature of the room, leading to all 4 of your ACs overheating much more easily during the battle. This is all in one mission, and it's absolutely fantastic. I would love to see more multi-staged, exciting missions like this from the franchise in the future, because being able to just do all of this in one solid 5 to 10 minute run of combat felt so satisfying. But getting closer to the end of the game, we start doing a lot of missions to suppress rampaging AI units for the various corporations, as they all had a mysterious malfunction and lost control of their units on the same day. Which is incredibly weird when you have 3 corporations that are all literally at war with one another have the same malfunction at the same time. After a few of these missions, we get the revelation that all corporations that had this malfunction had gotten their AI tech from the Artificial Intelligence Office, and as they're the only common denominator, they must be the cause of the malfunctions. And at this exact moment in the story, we completely lose contact with the AIO, only making them even more suspicious. With this, all the corporations end up banding together, sending you and countless other ACs on these large-scale operations that buy humanity just a little more time to figure out what's going on. This eventually culminates in you being sent into a mysterious facility within the Silent Line, where you end up finding innumerable unmanned AC units, culminating in a confrontation with IBIS, an artificial intelligence defending the facility, who happens to bear a striking resemblance to a certain pool ball. And this finally feels like the return of the Armored Core final boss fight. In all honesty, none of the games since Master of Arena have felt like they had an actual intimidating final boss fight, but IBIS is definitely the toughest one since then. They even lose parts of their AC as the battle progresses, causing them to change up their method of attack, effectively making up mini phases of the fight. And even though I beat IBIS on the first attempt, I was sweating my ass off when I did so, and it definitely wasn't an easy feat. After defeating this AI and destroying the central computer of the facility, we're treated to the end of the story. In this ending, it's revealed that not only was there a second layer behind the Silent Line, but IBIS and the other AI units in the Silent Line were so aggressive throughout the game because they were trying to prevent you from discovering it. This raises further questions about the controller from Armored Core 3, as it's not the only AI controlling an entire underground society of humans that believe that they are the only survivors on the planet. How could we never have known? How many of these societies are out there? It's genuinely fascinating stuff, and the twists and turns throughout the story to get to this point were actually really well executed, making this easily the best Armored Core story so far. Overall, I think the campaign of Silent Line is a massive improvement over that of Armored Core 3, but I also think that the arena is a pretty substantial downgrade. And this means that scoring this game is kind of weird for me, because as much as I want to be objective about it, my love for the arena is kind of pulling me the other way. But ultimately, I'm going to have to concede and be objective about this one, and I'm going to be giving Armored Core 3 Silent Line a 7.9. But what do you guys think? Those of you that have played the game, those of you learning about it for the first time, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, feel free to go ahead and leave a like, a comment, a subscription, anything to let me and the algorithm know that you did enjoy. It helps me out a lot, so I really appreciate it. And if you didn't know already, I stream almost every day right here on the channel, and recently we've been playing Armored Core 6 since that just came out, and we'll be playing Starfield later this week, so feel free to stop by and say hi. And if you haven't seen them already, then you'll definitely enjoy the rest of my Armored Core videos, so I'll have the playlist linked right here on screen.